Hello everybody and welcome to another video in this Linux for Programmers tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be covering shell scripts. Now, shell scripts are a way to actually execute shell commands within a script. So you can think of it just like any other script that you might write in, say, a programming language like Python, except instead of having Python syntax, you're having shell syntax. So you can still implement things like loops, if statements, conditions. You can have statements that execute and expressions that evaluate, and I'm going to be showing you most of that in this video. Regardless, shell scripts are good to know, and as a programmer, you should definitely have an idea of how they work and at minimum be able to read them. So with that said, let's dive in after a quick word from our sponsor, which is Linode. Linode is the best company to use to host your website, app, or service in the cloud. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode, and Linode just makes it really easy for you to get your server up and running as fast as possible. So with that said, check out Linode from the link in the description and make sure to claim your $100 in free credit when signing up with a new Linode account. All right, so let's dive in here. The first thing I want to show you how to do is just make a shell script. So when I say shell script, all I'm talking about is a file that has shell script syntax inside of it that allows you to actually execute that file and then have these commands run. So let's create a really basic one. I'm going to use Nano as my editor here, but feel free to use Vim, Emacs, whatever you would prefer. You just have to make sure you type the same thing that I am. So first of all, we need to make a shell script file. Now, all shell files or all shell scripts, whatever you want to call them, end in .sh. So after my nano command, I'll just type test.sh, and this is going to be our first script. Let's go ahead and press enter. All right, so now we're in nano, and the first thing that we need to do in our shell scripts is we need to add what's actually called a shebang. Now, I think this is a hilarious name, but this is actually the name of it, and what this is a pound sign, an exclamation point, and then the name of the shell that you want to run this file in. So you don't really have to understand this, but we're just going to do /bin/bash. And what we're saying is that we want to use bash to run this file. So whenever you make a shell script, you're usually supposed to, at the very top, tell the shell script by adding this little comment here, what shell you want to run this in. Now, there's multiple shells. Bash is just the most common one and the one that we've been using. And well, that's the one that we want to run this script in. So again, that's called a shebang. You always add that at the very top of your file. And 99.9% of the time, it's going to be exactly what I have right here. Now, the next thing I'll show you is just how you actually write a comment in this shell script. So a comment is simply a pound sign like I just did above, and then whatever you want. Anything that is after a pound sign is not going to be executed in your script. So think of this like any other comment that you would see in any programming language. It's just this is how you do a comment. Now, some people may be confused that our shebang was actually a comment, but since we have this exclamation point, it kind of differentiates it. So that's kind of the main difference. All right, so now that we have that, let's write a really basic script. All I want to do here is just echo some things out to the screen. So I'm going to say echo, and we're going to go with our classic example of hello world, exclamation point. Then I'm going to type echo and just hi. Now, anything that you can write in your regular command line, so in the Linux terminal, in bash, you can write inside of here. So I can type ls-l, right, or ls-a, or whatever. I can type all these commands here, and they will just execute as a script. So when I run this file, all the commands that I type will execute. So let's just start out really basic with some echoes. So we're going to have our two echoes there. I'm going to exit, and now I will show you how to run the shell script. So to run the shell script, you're going to type /, and then the name of the script, which in our case is going to be test.sh. Now notice that when I try to do this, we get permission denied. Why are we getting permission denied? We're the root user, we should have permission to do everything. Well, the reason we're getting permission denied is because if we have a look at this file, I believe it's ls-l, and then we say test.sh, we can see that we do not have execute privileges on this file. So what we are trying to do is execute this file. So what we need to do is add the permission to execute this file. So what we'll do is we will say chmod +x, and then we will say the file name, which is test.sh. So now that I do this, let's have a look at the permissions, and we can see that everybody can now execute this file. If we just wanted to make it so that we could execute this file, well, we know how to do that. I showed that in the chmod and permissions video, but now notice that test.sh is showing up in green, which means that we can execute it. So now we can execute it with /test.sh, and when we do that, notice we get two print lines out here. We get hello world and hi, which is exactly what we wrote in the shell script. So that is the basics of shell scripting, but now let's show some more things that we can do inside of here. And again, this is not going to be an exhaustive tutorial. I'm just giving you an idea of how to run a shell script, what a shell script is, and basic stuff that you can do inside of it. But you always need to make sure that after you write your shell script, you give yourself permission to actually execute the script by adding the execute permission to your user or to all users that have access to the file. All right, so we have our two echoes. Now, what else should we do? Well, let me show you how we actually implement a function inside of a shell script. So I'm going to assume that you're familiar with functions. If you're not, they're pretty straightforward. You'll probably understand how they work. But I'm going to say, actually, why am I calling this today? I don't know. Let's call this print, okay? We're going to put two parentheses and then open some squiggly brackets. And this is how you make a function in a shell script. So you put the name of the function, two parentheses or brackets, whatever you want to call it, and then open up these curly braces here. And then inside of this function, usually you tab in or 1, 2, 3, 4 characters inwards. You don't have to have this indented, but usually that's convention. Then you can write whatever you want to happen inside of this function. So I can say echo, and then let's just say called function exclamation point. And then what I could do is I could call this function. So to call this function is how you would assume. We just write the function signature like that, and well, we can use it many times. So now we're calling this function 4 times, and yeah, let's just give this a shot. So now let's escape and let's run this file, and we see we get a syntax error, and that is totally my bad. I just made a small mistake here. We actually don't have the parentheses when we call this function. Sorry, this was my bad. I don't know why I added these, but we can remove these, and if we just call the function like this should work now. So now let me escape. Let's run this, and now we can see that we called the function. So when you call the function, all you have to do is just write the name of the function. You don't have to actually put the parentheses afterwards. Now let me show you how we can pass arguments to our functions, or how we can, handle parameters and stuff. So remember that when we were talking about environment variables, the way we accessed them when we were, say, printing them out was we used the $sign. Now inside of the shell script, this is the exact same thing. Whenever we're accessing variables, even ones that we've defined inside of this script, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, we use the $sign to access them. So let's say I wanted to pass something to my function here. What I would do is I would simply write after the print function call whatever value I wanted to pass. So I could say print, and then Tim is great, like that. Now I could pass this as a string if I wanted to pass this as one argument, but if I wanted to pass multiple arguments, I wanted to pass Tim, then is, then great, I would do it like this. So every time you want to pass multiple things, you separate them by spaces. If you just want to pass one thing and say it's a string, for example, then you would have to put this inside of quotation marks. Now I'm kind of assuming you guys have some understanding of programming, so that's why I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here. But let me show you now how we would actually print this out. So we're passing some value to our function. Now, how do we actually get that value from inside of our function? Now, some of you would assume that we do something like this, right? That's actually not what you do. If you want to get the value that is passed to a function, you use $1, $2, and all the way up until the number of values that you pass to this function. So in this case, we're passing one value to this function. So the first parameter is going to be identified by $1. Now, if we wanted to access the second parameter or the second argument, that would be $2, right? So that's kind of the idea here. So let me just show you this. I'm going to say echo and then called function. And then inside of this string, I'm going to put a $sign. We'll go like that. And then we will put number 1. So now what this should do is print out whatever we pass to it as argument or parameter 1. So let's run this now, and we see that we get called function, and then Tim is great. But for all of the other ones, it didn't pass anything, or nothing showed up because there was no $1. So that is how we pass parameters or arguments or whatever you want to call it to the function. We use $1, and then just to show you an example here, let's say we were to print 1, 2. Now, if I say $1 and then $2, I now will be able to access both of those values. So let's run this, and we see that we get called function 1, 2. We passed both values to our function. All right. So let's go back inside of here now. That's the basics of functions and how you pass values through. Now let's describe how you make a variable. So making a variable is really easy. All you do is you type the name of your variable. So let's say x equals sign without a space, and then what you want it to be equal to. So in this case, we can say, you know what, let's say x equals 6. That's all you do when you want to make a variable. Now, typically when you're making these variables, or sorry, not typically, when you're making these variables, you cannot have exclamation points in your variable names, you cannot have spaces in your variable names, and you usually do not want to start your variable names with numbers. Now, I'm actually not sure if you can or cannot start your variable names with numbers, but the convention is just to use text. You can end the variable name in a number if you wanted to, and if you needed to use a space, you would use an underscore instead. So say I wanted my variable Tim is great, then I would go Tim underscore is underscore great, just like you would in most programming languages. So let's say x equals 6. And now after we do all our calls to the print function, what we can do is we can say echo and then $, and then x. Now this is going to access the x variable and print that out. Now, I might have made a small mistake here, but let's just run this and see, because if I made a mistake, well, that'll be a good learning opportunity. But let's get out, let's run this, and notice that now it does indeed print 6. Now, the reason I had thought I made a mistake was because I thought you might have to put that $, inside of a string, but it turns out that you do not. You can just access the variable directly, and it will print it out. So let's go back in there. So now what I'm going to show you is how to implement control flow. So if, else, elif, all that, and then I'm going to talk about something called exit. I'm actually going to start with exit because this is pretty important. Every time you have a Linux process or a Linux script or whatever it may be, when it finishes running, it has an exit code. Now, by default, that exit code is just going to be 0, which means, this was successful. But it is good practice in your shell scripts to implement your own exit codes just to make sure it's very clear that, hey, this script finished successfully, or no, this script failed. Now, there's a bunch more exit codes as well. I'm not going to really go through all of them, but all of this is to say that when you end your script and all was good, you exit with the code 0. Now, whenever your shell script hits this line, hits exit 0, it immediately stops the script, stops processing everything, and then returns this code to whatever called it. Now, it's a bit more advanced than that, but that's kind of the basics. And if you exit with code 0, that means that everything was successful, script went well. If you exit with code 1, that meant that there's a failure in the script, so you're telling whatever called this, hey, this script failed. So just keep that in mind. Exit code 0, success. Exit code 1, failure. So say you have some exception that gets raised in your program, or you just want to all of a sudden exit out of the program and tell them, hey, this failed. You would just write exit 0. Now, in fact, I can kind of prove this to you. Even we can do exit 1 as well, but inside of this print statement, if I type exit and then let's just go with 0, which means success, after I call this print statement the first time, the script is going to end. It's going to stop running, so we won't see the output afterwards. All right, so let's run this script and notice that we call this function one time and then all of a sudden it exits. So now let's just see what happens when we go with exit 1 instead of exit 0, just to show you. So we'll change the exit code and then rerun this. And, same thing happens. We don't see that the exit code was 1 or 0, but if you were running this from another script, you would be able to check what that exit code is. And there's some other more advanced things. But anyways, when you see exit or when you write exit, it will just stop the script immediately. And that's good to know. So we will continue in 1 second, but I need to quickly thank the other sponsor of this video, which is Algo Expert. Algo Expert is the best platform to use when preparing for your software engineering coding interviews, and they feature a data structures crash course, over 120 coding interview questions, mock interviews, and behavioral interview prep, and a ton of other really valuable things. Check out Algo Expert from the link in the description and use the code TechWithTim for a discount on the platform. All right, so I'm back. Something went wrong with my screen recording software, so I had to restart, but notice that I've emptied my bash script. Now what I'm going to show you is if, elif, and else statements. So these are pretty straightforward, and I just want to make it clear that I'm not going into a ton of depth here. I'm just showing you kind of some working knowledge. This is not discussing how everything works on a low level. Again, I could spend a whole tutorial series talking about bash, so this is just a high level overview. Anyways, let's write a function here. I'm going to show you how we can implement if and else statements. So I'm going to say control, and then I will open my parentheses, and inside of here, I'm going to write my first if statement. So I'm going to say if, and then I'm just going to, first of all, end this if statement with fi. So whenever you write an if statement, you need to end it with fi. Now, fi will go at the very end of your entire conditional block or entire control statement block. So in this case, we just have an if statement, but we also could implement an elif. So let's go here. We could say elif like that, and then we could say else as well. So just keep that in mind. You can have if, else, and elif. I will show all of them in 1 second, but you do need to end the entire conditional block with fi. All right, so we have if. Now, if we want to write an expression or a condition to be evaluated here, what we do is we use a double set of square brackets like this. Now, I'm not going to explain why we're using these square brackets, but what this does is evaluate an expression. Now, there is also another way where you use single brackets, but double brackets are kind of the standard right now, and for our purpose, they just make more sense. So you can look that up on your own. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but we'll use the double set of brackets. Now, inside of the double set of brackets, what we can write is an expression. Now, there's a ton of different expressions in Bash, and you can do things like check if file exists. You can compare strings for equality. You can perform arithmetic operations and check if two numbers equal each other. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. But I will show you the most basic comparison, which is just comparing two strings. So what I'm going to do is say number 1, which is going to be our first parameter, is equal to, notice that I have a space here and that I have a space between my first bracket, and then whatever string I want to check if this is equal to. So in this case, I'll say Tim. So what I'm doing is I'm checking if the first parameter past this function is equal to Tim. Then the syntax here is a semicolon to end your condition or end your expression. And then you type then, and then underneath here, usually indented, but doesn't matter, you type what you want to happen if this is the case. So I'm going to say echo, and I will just say Tim is great, exclamation point. Okay, so that is our first if statement. Let's show how this works. I'm going to call control, and I'm going to pass Tim, and then I'm going to call control, and I'm going to pass Bill. All right, so I save the file. I'm going to exit, and I'm going to run this. And then notice we get Tim is great, but it only happened once because, of course, the second call to control that we did was false, right? The if statement didn't run. Okay, so let's clear that. Let's go back in. And now let me show you how we do else. So this is pretty intuitive, but to add an else, you quite literally just type else. And then underneath the else, you type what you want to happen if the condition is not true. So I'll say echo, Tim is not great, exclamation point. All right, so let's run this now. And notice that we get Tim is great, then Tim is not great. So the if ran, and then the else ran. Okay, so now let's do this again. I will show you the elif. Again, very straightforward. And just like in other programming languages, you can have as many elifs as you want. So you can say elif, then you write your condition, put your semicolon, and then put the then. So now let's actually check a second parameter. So let's say number 2 is equal to, and let's go with Joe. And now let's call control. So we'll say control, and we'll go with Bill, and then Joe. So now we should hit our elif in this last control call. All right, so let's escape, and let's run this. And, oh, we got an issue here, syntax error, unexpected token else. Let's go back in here. What was incorrect? Well, I forgot to add something to do in our elif. So let me just add something. The reason we were getting an issue is because we didn't have anything after the then. Well, we did. We had else, but that's just the incorrect format. We need to have something to do in the elif case, right? So now what I'm going to do is say echo, and then we'll just say Joe. All right, so now let's run this. And yeah, all is good. We get Tim is great, Tim is not great, and then Joe. Okay, so that is if, elif, and else. Again, you can have many more elifs as you want. Just make sure that you start with an if and that you end with fi. Okay, so that was pretty much all I want to show you. One last thing is how you get console input. Now, this is actually pretty straightforward. The command is very intuitive. It's actually called read. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can get input from the user and then how you can print out that input. So let's say you want to get the user's name or something. What you can do is you can type read. Now, read pretty much means like let the user start typing. And then you can do -p. Now, -p stands for prompt. So this means if you don't want to just have an empty line that the user starts typing on, instead you want to put something on that line. So say like name : and then the user gets to start typing. You would do -p. You would do your prompt. So like name : like that. And then lastly, you would put the variable name that you want to store the value that's typed in. So I would say the following. I would say read -p, the prompt, and then text. Now what this will do is store whatever I type in the variable text. So what I could do now is say echo and then $text, and this will simply print out whatever the user typed in on this read line. Now, I understand this is maybe going a bit fast, but let's just run this and see how this works. So when I run this, notice it says name. I can type, let's type hello, and then it prints out hello because, well, that's what we typed in. So really straightforward. You can add the prompt. You don't have to add the prompt. If you don't want to add the prompt, then you just remove that -p and the prompt. You put the variable that you want to store this in. Notice that I didn't have to define this anywhere else. I just typed the name of the variable. Then you can access the variable later on using the $sign like we've done. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in another Linux for Programmers tutorial video.